and go back to there. This is just in case you did not get a copy of the syllabus that I emailed whenever it was, Friday, Saturday. It's on D2L under the content tab. It's also on D2L under the announcements. The first thing you see, hopefully, when you open D2L. My office is in Peck Hall 352. Take a right, take an immediate left into the office block, take another left, take another right, take another right. I don't even think I have my phone number. Nope, I don't include my phone number. I literally do not answer the phone at all. I just got in I was on medical leave last fall because I had, which did I have replaced this time? Had my left knee replaced, and there's just a ton of messages, and I don't even bother looking at them. If you need to reach me, this email, this is my main email. I may change that very shortly. You've probably heard the university may be canceling the D2L course mail, the email that's possible within D2L, some kind of, I don't know, hacking possible, whatever. But they're working around trying to make it more secure. As of right now, it's still open. Some faculty are using it, some faculty are not. I created that list to be able to send all of you messages. I would rather use D2L if it's possible, so we might switch to that, okay? Office hours, the beginning is an approximation, okay? The 7:15 to 8:30 Monday, Wednesday. The 8:30 part's, good. And 7:15 to 7:55 Tuesday, Thursday. It's because I have an 8 o'clock class Tuesday, Thursday. The 7:15, the reason it's a little iffy, that'll depend on traffic. I live 9 miles west of here, and sometimes coming in on Old Fort and Broad is just a nightmare, even at that early in the morning. You know what class this is. If they get it in, this is the book. I'm so confused about bookstore stuff. I think I sent an email with an electronic where you can get this from Google for $38 electronically. I don't think it'll be $38 when it's available in the bookstore. I think it's going to be probably double that or more. The drawback to that, and I was talking with one of my colleagues about, is if you do that electronically, that requires every one of you to have a tablet, laptop, something like that in front of you rather than eyes up here. Because I will, almost every day, this whiteboard will be full from that side to this side. Unfortunately, in this recording, actually I do have it now set where it comes to where? Right about here, but it's really small. So if you try to watch it on the D2L recording, you'll have to bump up, magnify the size. On this won't catch everything, but it'll catch from probably about like here to about here. So you can always, at the end of class or at any point that you want to, boy, should I go there? Should I even mention this? I don't care if you come out or if I've got stuff written on the board when you first come in, if you come out and just take pictures, okay? You'll see me sometimes at the end of class. I'll have something written up here that I won't have gotten to, and I'll take a picture and make sure I remember what it was I put, well, not so that I remember, so that I have what it was I put down, okay? Because almost everything I write on the board, it's all just coming out of here. It's not notes. So this is the textbook, 3rd edition, not the 4th edition. The 4th edition will be a lot more expensive because it's brand new. Disclaimer. Probably one of the most important sentences in the entire syllabus. It's subject to revision. If there's a rabbit trail I can go down, I'll probably go down that rabbit trail and I'll chase that little bunny till it's dead, okay? Just as a warning, I'll try not to. As I mentioned I think in the email, I've got 8 days set aside for Beowulf. For most of you, that will be like your introduction to purgatory. Well, hell first, then purgatory. Hopefully I will be able to get it done more quickly than that and allow us to have more time for other stuff later on. We'll see. And there's a couple reasons why I do that, and I'll talk about that later. Probably not today. We'll likely get behind at some point. I noticed came in here and looked at the syllabus and said, what are we doing today? And I looked at it. Syllabus introduction, Celtic, Roman, Anglo-Saxon periods, Bede 44 to 56, and we have Bede again on Thursday. Probably won't get to Bede at all today, other than for what's right there, second to the last thing on that left date, okay? But we'll see. If we're not behind today, I can almost guarantee you we'll be behind as of Thursday. So, I'll make adjustments in class, or I'll talk about them in class. 99% of the time, I do remember to announce it on D2L on the announcements thing and to send out an email. Especially if it's a major adjustment. I'm moving an exam or something like that, okay? Which the exams aren't posted on the syllabus anyways. So that's what all that stuff is. This is pretty important too. Check your MTSU email, and I need to make a comment again about emails in just a second. And D2L daily. Why? Something may come up and I've got to cancel class. Like, as happened a few days ago before school started, I went out to start my car and nothing. I've replaced the battery 3 times in this car in the last year. There's something weird electronically going on and nobody can figure it out. In that case, I'm not going to call Uber or a taxi or something. I'm just going to cancel class because, as I said, everything's recorded. I've got my classes going back to 2012 on YouTube. And I can pretty much find an iteration of what we'll be covering that day available, and I'll just post it so that we don't get behind that way, okay? But I'll do that by 6 o'clock. 6:30 at the absolute latest. For those of you who are coming from Nashville, that gives you, I hope, plenty of time, okay? Students with disabilities, I think I've already heard from that office, so don't need to worry about that. Because of the bookstore screw up, that pretty much makes all of this stuff no longer appropriate. But if you were interested, these five links, assuming they're still good, I did not check them this time. These 5 links are all to articles that argue that taking notes by hand, not this by hand, but this by hand, makes you retain the material. There's something between the movement of the hand and the brain that it sticks. This is mere transcribing. Like I'm dictating, you're just listening and not filtering stuff out. If you have to take notes this way, you filter, all right? And hopefully filter the right stuff out, not the wrong stuff. So because you're using electronic materials, probably for some of you, I'm not going to walk around and make sure you're not TikToking or whatever, at least for the next 90 days, etc. I'm not kidding. The reason I have this up, several years ago, when Facebook was still somewhat new, had a student come up and say, so-and-so in front of me was on Facebook the whole class. I had another student come up and say, so-and-so in front of me was on Pornhub. I am not kidding, okay? Don't. Just don't. There is a very important thing at the beginning of that, however, and I forgot to mention this to my first class yesterday. If you're first responder, all that kind of stuff, let me know. Keep your phone out. If it vibrates and you get up and leave, I'll understand. Similarly, and this is I think the more important part. If you've got something now going on with a member of your family or someone who's very close to you, sorry, me. If it's your 4th cousin, 5th, 5 times removed, I don't care. If it's your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, your roommate, your lover, etc., that's important. If you've got a situation right now, one of them is ill in the hospital, etc., let me know. And if you think there's a possibility that you might have to miss class or it's going to hinder your involvement in class, let me know now. If something like that happens in the course of the semester, let me know immediately. Immediately doesn't mean, God forbid this happens, your boyfriend gets stabbed, and you get on your phone and, Dr. Sherman, I'm not going to stop the bleeding first, that kind of thing. It's happened before. We had a student, I can't remember how many years ago, Bell Street parking lot. The student was waiting to park, and another student in a little VW Bug took the parking spot. The student who was waiting to park got out and stabbed the other student. And is in prison now. Parking's not that important, okay? In this class. I'm not kidding. People are crazy. Someone gets diagnosed with cancer. It's happened almost every semester in my classes. A family member. A parent has a heart attack. Several years ago, girl walks into class. Her dad just died. Literally. And she's coming to class, and I'm like, where are you? And I, get her to call somebody, and another guy in the class helps get all her stuff together, walks her out to her car. Just don't show up. Email me within 24 or 48 hours. I'll do everything I can to make sure you can still complete the course. It probably won't be here. Several students I've had, they've done everything online before it was online. They watched the videos, they took the quizzes, they did the reading, etc. So, long story short, let me know. If you wait, this happened last spring, if you stop showing up after the second week and you notify me literally the week before finals, you're screwed. You dug your grave, okay? So, classroom decorum, I'm going to let you read all that on your own. The only one about those that I really, they're all important. If you eat, that's fine. Don't eat loud, crunchy stuff, because the people around you won't like that. Similarly, if you drink something, try to, as much as possible, drink something that has a lid. Okay? Had a student sitting in that seat yesterday, had a fountain drink Coke, did something when she moved and getting ready to leave the class, lid popped off and there's Coke all over the floor. Okay? All the other kind of stuff is just, basic decency and all that. Don't wear headphones. Had a student sitting in that back corner one day with his Beats on, and I could hear it up here. Okay, don't take selfies. Every example I give is something that's happened. Papers due at the beginning of class on the assigned day. Don't ask me for an extension. What else? If you know you're going to miss class, let me know ahead of time. We meet Monday, Wednesdays. Rutherford County Traffic Court is Tuesdays, Thursdays, I believe. So it shouldn't affect you, or at least it used to be. Quizzes will be online. Exams will be online on D2L. Notice the failure to complete 3 or more quizzes, you're out of here. So if you want to just decide to blow off 2, that's fine. You get 0 points, obviously, for those. I'm not going to just not count those. But if you miss 3, you automatically fail the course. And if you don't turn in an exam, and if you don't turn in the paper, okay? If I know by midterms that you're failing the course, well, let me rephrase that. If I know soon you're failing the course, I'll let you know so you can drop. Somewhere on the syllabus, I think I put it on this one. Yeah, important dates, that gives the various dates for dropping and still being able to get some money or no money, dropping with a W or dropping with a grade of F. I think that one doesn't affect your GPA, not positive, but dropping with a W does not affect your GPA. I'm more than willing, as long as the powers that be let me, to give you a W, if that's necessary, okay? So, very, very briefly, looking at the schedule. First, I can no longer figure out dates. Looks like 3 weeks are some Old English materials before Beowulf, and then several weeks of Beowulf, and then about 2 weeks, a little bit more than that maybe, of Middle English literature, and then the last 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, something like that, is on what's called the early modern period or the Renaissance period. The reason I heavy load the Old and Middle English stuff is because the odds are great that none of you will have any other opportunity to study of that in your undergraduate career. The medieval course at the undergraduate level has not been offered, I don't think, in 5 or 10 years. And the simple, I've tried to offer it, and it always gets canceled because it doesn't have enough enrollment. It's not a quote-unquote sexy, hip, fun class. I mean, anyways. Same thing with Beowulf, same thing with Chaucer. There's a Chaucer course. It's seldom offered, all right? Okay, last thing, very, very briefly, paper assignment, okay? You're not gonna write an original research essay or something like that. You're gonna choose 5 articles about a topic related to the material we've read, and you're gonna write essentially a little kind of bibliographical review essay. So you try and pick, and we'll talk about this a little more later, try and pick 5 articles maybe that are about the same thing where the authors of the articles actually refer to each other. So you can kind of create this conversation, okay? I think I've put up on D2L a sample of what this should look like, all right? Again, we'll talk about it more. When and if you have questions, let me know. And then I should not have included, probably shouldn't have included all of this stuff. It's still important, but it's not like you're doing a regular scholarly paper where you're going to be, quoting from and citing, etc. You will need to quote from the articles you do cite and such, okay? Any questions at all? 20 minutes. All right, then I'm going to shut this down and go back to just what's on the board. Where is the... I don't want to shut down the whole system. Just want to shut down that. And put that up. Move that. So what I'm doing, get rid of that. With this information here, these dates, I've got some names, I'm going to fill in information about these. This covers the first section, the Old English section, okay? When we get to Chaucer in the Middle English period, we'll have another set of dates and such. This covers everything from today to the end of the semester. And I'm not going to say much about that part, but I'll start with that. Since it's now 10, I can close. 9, not 10. The period we're discussing, just commonly referred to as BritLit 1, is from the beginning of British or English literature to, where's the date? Oh, it's not up there. It's here. 1660. Okay? 1660 is a really good cutoff date, and it's a nice hard and fast date. It's the date of what's called the Restoration. Okay? I'll get to that in just a minute. So these 3 periods, Old English or Anglo-Saxon if you want, 500 to 1100. One of the reasons I'm using the 3rd edition of the Broadview Anthology and not the 4th edition of the Broadview Anthology is because they no longer use the term Anglo-Saxon in the 4th edition. They don't use the term Anglo-Saxon because of something that has relatively recently occurred. Not like a single event, but a change of thinking, so to speak. Anybody take a wild guess? What might Anglo-Saxon suggest? Anybody?
What's Anglo-Saxon? Like, I know that's is Anglo short for something? Anglo-Arabian?
It's where Anglo, the English, comes from.
Oh.
Angles, okay? Have you ever heard of the phrase or the acronym WASP? W-A-S-P?
Oh, yes.
White,
Oh.
Anglo-Saxon Protestants.
That's what
Why
it is.
white? Where are they largely from? Northern Europe, okay? Anglo-Saxon, Angles and the Saxons were tribes of northern Germany, and then Protestants because of the Protestant Revolution. We'll talk about all of that, okay? about 15, 20 years ago, most, varieties, denominate, whatever you want to call them, of white supremacists started referring to themselves as Anglo-Saxons. And because of that, an idea developed within the academy, universities worldwide, predominantly Western countries, that we shouldn't use the term Anglo-Saxon then to describe the peoples who lived in the original Anglo-Saxon areas. We should use something else, like the early English inhabitants of Britain. English comes from Ing, which comes from Eng. They're related. Okay? Ing was the god of the Angles, right? Long story short, because of a bunch of morons, you're fine. I'm not hesitant in using various terms to describe people that I think are idiots. Because of a bunch of morons, that term, Anglo-Saxon, is no longer even used by literally what 5 years ago were called Anglo-Saxon scholars. The fourth edition, I had a little email tete-a-tete with one of the editors of the Broadway and then with the owner/publisher of the Broadview book. And he's like, there's just, because this is going on, we feel it's best to just not use the term so that we don't offend. And I just said, better to defend it and reclaim it than give it up, okay? Didn't agree. That's fine. So I will not order the fourth edition. So, Old English, you use the term Old English to refer to the language, okay, or the culture. Anglo-Saxon are the peoples that came from Germany, essentially. But if you go to, if you study anything with Beowulf, and you learn about J.R.R. Tolkien, who's a foremost Beowulf scholar of his day, he held the position of the Bosworth-Taller Chair of Anglo-Saxon at Oxford. I don't think they've changed the name of the chair yet. The preeminent journal in Old English Studies called Anglo-Saxon England has been changed. They've changed the name. In my opinion, utterly ridiculous. So, Old English is from the period, or the Anglo-Saxon period, is from 500 to 1100. Why 500? Nice even number, right? Nope. Well, kind of. It begins, we'll come over in just a minute, we'll come over here. It begins really, the period, around 449, 450. But nothing's written then. Nothing's really written in 500 either. But there have been enough changes between 450, 449, and 500 that this is kind of the beginning period, so to speak. 1100, that is a nice round number. If we were to be really, really specific, we would have to say this goes up to 1135, because it's in 1135 that we see the first written indication of what is called Middle English. That is, Anglo-Saxon, the language, okay, was still in use until at least 1100, 1135. We'll talk about that more when we get to it, okay? So the Middle English period, circa 1100 to roughly 1500. Why? Because the Middle English language is still being used, we can still find it in written documents up to 1500. But there is another, where is it? There is another date that a lot of people do use to indicate the end of the end of what's called the medieval period. The medieval period, or the Middle Ages, both Old and Middle English, okay? And that 1485 date is, we'll talk about this when we get to Middle English, the Battle of Bosworth Field, which is when Henry VII, if I could write, defeats Richard III and becomes the first Tudor king. That then leads to the Renaissance, or Renaissance, if you want to pronounce it like a Brit, or the also called the early modern English period. Notice, this is an example of what I was just talking about with not using the term Anglo-Saxon. Okay? This early modern English is an example of that same kind of ideology. Well, Renaissance is thought to be, and it is kind of, a loaded term. What does Renaissance mean? Anybody know?
Rebirth?
Rebirth. Renaissance. Native, natal, etc. So, rebirth. Who came up with it? The guys writing in the Renaissance. Rebirth of what? Classical learning. The rebirth of ancient Greek and Roman. Why? Because at the end of the Crusades, or during the Crusades, during this period, soldiers, monks, etc., were taking documents from the Eastern, what had been the Eastern Roman Empire, Constantinople, for example, modern day Istanbul, originally Byzantium, from that area back to their Western countries of Spain, England, Italy, France, Germany, etc. And when they did that, they began reading them, began translating it, and what happened? People started to learn again about Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, Sophocles, and all these great writers. It's the rebirth of ancient learning. So prior to this, let's say Europe largely, prior to this, you had what? From ancient Rome, 753, something like that, BC, up until this date, you have the Roman Republic and then the Roman Empire. Right? It's what we call typically the ancient world. Right? An enlightened period. More or less, because of the emphasis on learning and such. And then this happens, we'll talk about it when we get to it, sack of Rome, first sack of Rome. And this, literally, as I said, it's called the medieval period, or the Middle Ages, talking just about England now. But it's also more this one, the Dark Ages. What does Dark Age imply? Lights are out. No learning going on. These people were all dummies. They were all stupid. Why? Because they didn't have classical learning. When we talk about King Alfred in a little while, and then a little bit later on, at one point in his career, Alfred sends a letter to a bishop. And in this letter, it's a preface actually, to his translation of a very important book about how to be a good priest, a shepherd of souls. Okay? And Alfred says, there's hardly anyone below the Humber River, which is a river in northern England, knows Latin, and no one above it. And what he means by that is the priests don't know the language they're giving the mass in. They don't understand a lick of what they're saying. It's just memorized. So he wants the priests to start learning Latin again, so they understand what they're doing, and so that they can properly answer questions, shepherd their sheep, the whole 9 yards, okay? So Dark Ages, Middle English period, or the medieval period, this was also part of the Dark Ages. And notice even Middle English implies what? If you're the middle child, that means there's an older one and a younger one, and you're the unimportant one, okay? Sorry for any of you who are middle children. It means there's an older version and there's a newer version. So the Middle Ages, what's another way of thinking of middle? The in-between, the not important. For the Renaissance, all of this, and Renaissance writers, all of this was unimportant, okay? Now, I've got this, Renaissance, these dates, This is talking about the literature of England. The Italian Renaissance begins 300 years before this. Dante, 1200s, late 1100s, 1200s, okay? That's just the big, broad overview of the everything we'll be covering. So, over to here. Hold on. So what do you have in what those islands are called today? What were they called before they were England? You still use part of the name, spell it differently.
Land?
Other than land. Terra, that's what Latin what it was called, Terra. Britain, Briton. AIN is an Anglicization of that, okay? That's what they called themselves partially, but more importantly, that's what the Romans called them, okay? Who were the first ones there? We don't know. I mean, we kind of do. We know there were people there around, at least around 4000 BC, because Stonehenge, the first part of it dates from around 3500. We now know that there were people who lived in the area between modern day, think of the east coast of England, modern day east coast of England, and modern day Belgium and the Netherlands. Because 10, 15, 20,000 years ago, the North Sea wasn't there. That was land. And then the oceans rose when ice packs and all that kind of melted. So, 55 BC, Julius Caesar invades. At that point, where is Julius Caesar in relation to Britain? Where did Caesar reign? Anybody? Rome. That's where we get the Romans from. Rome, okay? Why in the world would he want to invade Britain then, which is way the hell out there? Louder? Okay. Power, why does everyone who wants power, seize power? To control others. Why else? Britain had a couple of natural resources that Rome really wanted.
Trees, maybe?
Oak trees, great for building ships. British oak is one of the strongest woods there is, okay? And tin. London was originally a tin mining area. Cornwall's tin mining area, okay? So he wanted to, what does every good colonizer want? They want to take over the natural resources of the place they're colonizing, okay? 43 AD, Claudius annexes it. Why not Caesar?
I'm presuming there was something fairly important with Ides of March?
Yeah. Ides of March, which is what date? March 15th, 44 BC. 1 year earlier than this. Keep in mind when you go from here to here, you're going farther back in time, not closer in time. 44 BC, Caesar is assassinated on the Ides of March, all right? So in 43 AD, his successor, Claudius, annexes Britain. It now becomes essentially a province of Rome. He sends in centurions, lead them, a legion, okay, to take over. When this happens, a whole bunch of things start to occur, all right? One, you have now Roman soldiers stationed permanently throughout what is now called Britain, okay? So you have Roman soldiers stationed permanently. They start bringing their families over. And those who don't have families start intermarrying with the native peoples. The native peoples belong to what group? Anybody know? Other than Britons. Britons is one of these groups.
The Welsh?
Close, they're one of these groups. Boston has a basketball team named after these groups. The Celtics, the Celts. Americans are stupid, so we say, or the Boston says the Celtics. It's not a C, it's a K sound, okay? The Celts. You have Celts in Scotland. You have Celts in what is called Wales. And the only reason it's called Wales is because of these people, the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, the Germanic tribes who come over. Welsh do not call themselves Welsh. Why? That's a pejorative.
What?
It's a pejorative. It's a negative term. It'd be like a white person calling himself whitey or hunky. And there's a reason why it's so pejorative. It means exile. The term Welsh means, in Wales, land of the exiles. Why are they exiles? Because when this occurred, we'll get to it in a moment, a lot of the Celts who lived in central Britain, what we today call England, moved eastward. They fled. I almost said fleed. They fled from the Germanic invaders. Okay? And went into the mountainous areas of what is now called Wales. Okay? So what else happened? You've all seen pictures of Rome. What did the ancient Romans use to build with?
Was it marble stone?
Marble stone. Look at pictures of the Colosseum. I've never been to Rome. It's one of the places on my bucket list. The Celts did not build with stone. The Germanic tribes did not build with stone. They built with wood, with timber. So the Romans start building these magnificent edifices and structures. That's why if you go to the town of Bath, in the western part of England today, you can go to Bath and you could go walk around the baths. They still work. Okay? Various places in London, you can walk up to actual Roman walls and touch them. And I used to do a Harry Potter course every other year for about 7 years in London. I took these students, our first field trip was about a 7-mile walking tour of London. Had about 50% to do with Harry Potter and 50% to do with London history. And I'd always take them to this one section of the Roman wall. You could go put your hands on it. And not one of those students ever walked away without a little piece of ancient Roman wall in their pocket. Okay? But there's a bunch of them. So they started building with stone. Big buildings. All right? This is going to be important because when these guys arrive, the Germanic tribes, they're amazed. They've never seen anything like this. All right? So, Claudius annexes, another big important thing that happens as a result of this annexation. So, you get the legion that is now permanently stationed, maybe more than one, I can't remember. Wives, children start coming over living with them. They start intermarrying with the locals and such. Latin as a language has a huge influx at this point, okay, into native British culture. All right? I teach a course, used to teach a course, I haven't taught in years, called The History of the English Language. This is the first introduction of Latin to the English side of the Germanic languages per se, right? Because Latin starts getting used in Britain, and then when the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes come over, they pick up some of these terms, these Latin terms. For example, Middle Tennessee Boulevard is a what?
Road.
That's an Anglo-Saxon word. It's a native Germanic word. What was the other one somebody said? That's French. Comes much, much later. Street. Comes from Latin. Strat. Okay? Dish, cup, they come from Latin. All right? A whole bunch of others, which we won't go into. So the legions are there from 43 AD to 410 AD. You have Roman rule in Britain, right? That's what? Over 400 years, 450 years. We've only been a country not even 250 years. America is like, a baby in a diaper compared to most of the other countries of the world. And they have hoary old grandfathers, So, a lot of importation of Latin ideas, culture, etc. So, what happens in 410 AD? Rome gets attacked. Rome gets attacked, not one of the provinces. See, Rome has so expanded itself,
Stretched itself thin.
and what else has been happening in Rome? Because there's been the quote-unquote Pax Romana, so to speak, because the military's out there keeping all the provinces and the territories subjugated. How many of you have seen Hunger Games or read the novels? What's the difference between districts 11, 12, 13 and the capital? What's going on in the capital?
Like, aren't they like a lot of they're like making like weapons and stuff like that?
No.
I've
Did
not
they
read-
like
I've only read
hoard
the first one.
the stuff that they mine in District 12?
They take all the wealth that all the others produce, and they're living fat, dumb, and happy.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got wild excess, right? I mean, think Stanley Tucci with the hair and everything. It rots from within. That's when you get and we've got written examples that describes all of this. The vomitoriums, so that people can go think this side is all tables of food, and people come in and they just gorge themselves, and then they go outside to the vomitorium and so they can eat, literally do it again.
Is that true about the vomitorium? I heard that was like the vomitorium was actually like an entrance into like a theater for actors.
That I've never heard.
Okay.
But are you in theater?
Yeah.
That could be why. Yeah, that I've never heard. So Rome gets attacked. And it's not like, there's a single attack and somebody tweets out, send the legions home. This is an ongoing, slow kind of roll thing, right? So the legions are recalled from the outer provinces. Well, Britain's about the farthest outer province there is, okay? Now, one of the things that has happened between this date and this date is not only do they build these great edifices and towns and such, but a particular Roman Caesar named Hadrian has a wall built across northern England, what we call England today, from the North Sea to the Irish Sea. It corresponds almost, not quite exactly, with the modern day border between England and Scotland. So if you take a train and go up to Edinburgh, Scotland from London, you'll pass over Hadrian's Wall. If you blink, you'll miss it. In parts of England, if you blink for 20 minutes, you won't miss it. Because parts of it are still very, very present. And this wasn't like this kind of wall. This thing's, if I remember right, it's like 3 yards wide at points because there are storehouses and living quarters within the wall. Think of the Great Wall of China, kind of like that, all right? Hadrian, why does everyone build a wall?
Keep people out.
Bingo. Unless you're East German.
Keep people in.
The Berlin Wall was to keep people in. It wasn't to keep the West Germans from coming in because they didn't want to go in. The East Germans wanted to go out. Okay? You build a wall to keep people out. Well, who do they need to keep out? How many of you have seen Mel Gibson's Braveheart? Great movie, Oscar winner, horrible history. Absolutely blah, history. But great movie. It presents the Scots in the Middle Ages as if they were Picts. Picts are an ancient tribe. I'm drawing a mental blank. May or may not be Celtic. I think they aren't Celtic because Pictish language is not the same as the Celtic languages. Who lived up in northern Scotland. Well, the Picts would try to raid against northern Britain. The raids became so bad that Hadrian had the wall constructed to keep them out. The legions get withdrawn, And what happens when you pull something out of something else? What does it create? A hole, a vacuum. What does nature abhor? A vacuum. If you now have no power structure, what is going to happen?
Someone's gonna come in and make one.
Someone's going to make one. So when the legions get withdrawn, the Picts start raiding. And they're coming down further and further and further into England.
How do you spell that? Picts.
Picts. Okay? Now everything from here forward until I get to here comes from this writer named Bede. Okay? Bede is the first British/English historian. All right? He publishes a book, he writes a book called, I'll give it the English translation, A History of the English-Speaking Church. A church history of the English-speaking people. Church history of the English-speaking people. So the history is about the church of the English-speaking people, right? That's what this is. So, go back. Bede, at the beginning, and this is what you have in your book, the opening part is about the founding of Britain and all that kind of stuff, okay? But very quickly he gets into this other stuff. So Bede tells us that around 449, 450, these Germanic peoples started coming over, okay? And they came over because a Romano-British king, that is, he's got Roman blood in him and he's got British blood in him. He's the offspring of, at some point in time, a marriage or a joining together of Celtic and Latin, Roman, right? Guy named Vortigern. Vortigern.
That was a middle name.
Okay. His area in eastern, what is today England, what is called East Anglia, okay, is being overrun by the Picts. And he's getting tired of it. See, the Romano-British population at this time, they're not very good fighters. Why not?
I don't really need to take them for a while.
Why is the United, let me throw this, I'll make all kinds of popular references, history, culture, etc., throughout the course. Why is the United States still stationed in Europe, the United States military?
It's not, do they not have much over there themselves?
Why?
World War II.
Oh, yeah.
Which was won by, largely,
Us.
not trying to take ungained, glory, the United States entry.
We won.
It took, if Japan had never attacked Pearl Harbor, there's all kinds of alternative histories that have been written. I don't mean written as if they were real history. I mean fiction. Okay? Well, the man in the castle kind of thing. The United States entry into that turned the tide of the war. Not initially, Pearl Harbor was not good by any means. Guadalcanal, all that, those were all bad. Battle of the Bulge, dodgy. Same kind of thing with this. Okay, we've been protecting Europe for how long? 1945 to 2025. That's 80 years. That's 400 years. I mean, talk about turning your swords into plowshares. The native people, British people, they didn't need to do anything. They had the Roman legions there to protect them. And they weren't drafted into the Roman legions. Okay? So, they leave. Vortigern sends a message. I don't remember how Bede gives all the details. He doesn't give all the details. But he essentially sends a message to a variety of Germanic tribes, pleading for help. Why would he plead to the Germanic tribes for help? See, even the Romans knew this about the Germanic tribes.
Did they just like the
No, it's not that they didn't like the Picts. This isn't any kind of racial or racist animus or anything like that. It's because the Germanic peoples, man, they were good soldiers. And even better, mercenaries. You pay them enough, they'll fight your wars for you. What's the problem with hiring mercenaries? They're not loyal to you. What happens when the mercenaries decide, hey, the people we're defending against this other tribe, they're weak.
Why don't we just take over?
And this land's a lot nicer than our land. And their women are kind of prettier
Oh boy.
than our women. Okay? Now, over the last 30 or 40 years, there's been a change in narrative. I hate that word because it's so overused, but I'm going to use it. Regarding the coming of the Anglo-Saxons and Jews around 449, 450. It used to be, when I was learning history, when I was in my PhD and stuff, it used to be that these were called the Germanic invasions of Britain. Now, you almost never hear that phrase. Now it's the Germanic migrations. What's the difference between a migration and an invasion?
Migration implies a slower leg. And
Okay.
it certainly implies something that's a little less violent.
It's more peaceful. It's more, the door's open. Come on in. Weather's nice. Invasion is, we're taking your land and everything with it. When we get later on, up to this period, just a few moments, to the Vikings, nobody refers to the Vikings coming in as migrations. Because what do Vikings do? 3 words: rape, pillage, and plunder. That's pretty much it, okay? So, in 449, according to Bede's dating, and 450, by the way, the BC AD, that comes from Bede. He's the first person to use that terminology. And when you see it, for example, in your textbook today, I think it uses BCE and CE. What does BCE and CE stand for?
Before Common Era.
Before the Common Era and Common Era.
Wasn't it like before Christ before?
BC before Christ, AD Anno Domini in the year of our Lord. But both sets of terms, BC AD, BCE CE, have a specific reference point. What's the reference point? Birth of Christ. The one, in my opinion, sorry, I'm not proselytizing. One's more intellectually honest. It's just saying, it's this person that we date time by, so to speak. Okay?
I know that we stopped using. I know that birth of Christ is when we stopped using before Christ, but before everything before then is when we used it. But what is the starting point that ends the use of before Common Era? Is it just the same?
Yeah, that's
I've always thought that was funny.
that's the point. It's still Jesus' birth that becomes the defining period. We don't, for example, use the Chinese calendar or the not Mexican,
The Mayans?
the Mayan calendar or the Aztec calendar. We could, or the Jewish calendar. Jewish calendars were in year 4,000 or 5,000 something. Because they don't acknowledge Christ. I mean, he's just another guy. All right? If you're strictly following that kind of thing. Okay? So, they start coming over. You have a group called the ENGLs. They're from one part of northern Germany.
How's that spelled
Like angle, A-N-G-L-E, okay? There's going to be a little pun we're going to talk about in a moment about the spelling and the sound, okay? So because you have angles, and then in Latin, anybody know the Latin word for angel? Angelus. Angel, ankle. They're really close. And when we get to him, a pope that he speaks to, here's the 2 words, and it's kind of like, huh, And he makes a pun on it, which we'll talk about. So you have the Angles, and I don't remember if there's a map. I'll put it on D2L. If I don't already have it, I might already have put it up, because I did put up a bunch of stuff. A map of northern Germany. The Angles, who are from one part of Germany, and then you have the Saxons from the same area that is today, modern day Saxony, and then you have the Jutes. The Jutes are gone. Nobody is referred to as Jutes anymore. Okay? Interesting thing, the Old English word for the Jutes is very, very similar to the Old English word for giant. Okay? The word giant, however, G-I-A-N-T, that comes from Old French. That comes in later, much, much later, during the Middle English period, if I remember correctly. All right? So, they move in, and they each take a certain part. It's not like they sit down and have a treaty. It's just, this is how they naturally move into what is now England. The Saxons, we'll start with them. The Saxons settle the southern coast. Okay? Largely the southern coast, up to about the Thames River, which starts in London and ends in London and moves up at if you were looking at me, so say London's here, the Thames kind of goes up like this, right? So pretty much everything south of that, initially, when the Saxons invade, is Saxon. The Angles, they settle largely in the middle and eastern section, okay, of what is now England. And you have an area of England today that is still called East Anglia. Cambridgeshire, for example, smack dab in the middle of that. Cambridge University, all right? It's that area, if you were looking at a map of London, you've got this big bump, and then it dips in a little bit, and then you have another little bump, and it goes like this. This is all East Anglia. This little area over here, to the south and east of London, it's very small, is where the Jutes settled. Their main area, this is Kent. What city is in Kent? First part of the city's name sounds kind of like Kent. Chaucer wrote a series of tales. Canterbury, okay? So that's where they generally settle. So you have the Saxons down here, the Anglians up here, and the Jutes essentially right here. We still have the word Sax in a lot of place names today. Sussex, South Saxons, okay? Wessex, West Saxons. You don't have a Northix or Norix. That would be the North Saxons. There aren't any North Saxons. Why? That's Anglia. And you have Essex, the East Saxons. London is in Essex. All right? Questions, comments? Just, don't want to go too quickly.
You go ahead.
What about, was the Tale of the Rood written at this point?
Not yet, but it's during the Germanic period. It's during the Anglo-Saxon period.
Okay.
And you'll learn more about the Dream of the Rood probably than you ever want to.
Is this stuff also like in the book to be read?
Yeah, most of this is my kind of summation of those 14 pages or so of the Old English part of the introduction. Okay. I think I might give a little bit more dates than David. Right. So from a period of roughly 450 to almost 600, you've got now control by Anglo-Saxon Jutish tribes, okay? They speak Anglo-ish, Saxonish, and Jutish. That is, they speak Germanic dialects. But they're interacting with the quote-unquote natives also, all right? Now, one of the indicators possibly that these aren't migrations, that is, peaceful comings in and such, is that when they do come in, a lot of the Britons who had lived there flee. They flee in three general directions. They flee north, they flee west, they flee south, and southeast. Anybody know what the northern coast of France, off the southern part of the English Channel, is called? Brittany. What's the Y indicate? Ted Sherman, though my mom, even before she died, when I was 60, no, not 60, 50, 55, would still call me Teddy. It's diminutive. The Y ending on anybody's name indicates the little one. John, Johnny. Oh, little Johnny. Even though Johnny might be 6'7" and 400 pounds, and not be a smart idea to call that person Johnny unless that's what he goes by. Brittany, Little Britain. Why? It's where the Britons fled to from Big Britain. Okay? Similar, there's a town in Connecticut. It's called New Britain. Why? Because it was settled by people from Britain. You have New York, what was originally New Amsterdam. Why? Because you began to see people from York settling in rather replacing the Dutch settlers who founded New Amsterdam. Okay? So, north, they went up into Scotland, what is now Scotland. Okay? You had west, what is now Wales, the Cymry, the land, I think is called, the people are called the Cymry, and the land, and I might have this backwards, is called the Cymru. It's the native language, Gaelic, of that area. I try not to say it using the name Wales or Welsh. I'm part Welsh, so very, very small part. Okay? The name Wales, as I mentioned, comes from Anglo-Saxon Wales, which means foreigner, exile. That's why the Welsh don't like being called that name, okay? So, about 100 years, 150 years go by. Now, what are the Anglo-Saxon tribes? And I'm going to drop the Jutes just for brevity. What kind of ideas do they have? What gods do they have?
Norse gods.
Who are?
Odin, Thor, Freyr.
Tears Day, Woden's Day, Thor's Day, Freya's Day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We are 4 days of the week come from Germanic gods. All right? They haven't been Christianized. But then you also have Sunday, the day of the sun. They're pagan. I mean pagan. Not pagan in the sense of, all kinds of weird stuff, but Germanic mythology. Heimdall, Valhalla, the name, means the hall of the dead. Because Val comes from Wal. Wal means slaughter. W, we'll get into this in one of the poems. W, what's called ash, it's an A and E jammed together, has the sound ah, like in cat, okay? Wal, okay, it means slaughter. Valhalla is the hall of the slaughtered, the dead. Who gets to go to Valhalla?
The slaughtered, presumably, so soldiers.
Soldiers. And in some thinking, there are certain entrance requirements. In order to make it to Valhalla, you had to die with your sword in your hand. In other words, you had to die fighting. Which is why we will hear in some of the Old English poetry, a king is on his deathbed. Not good. Because deathbed implies, I'm old, I'm tired, I'm worn out. Nah, it's better to die in battle, We'll talk about that when we get to Beowulf. So it's pagan, right? In 597, according to Bede, I've never taught this time slot before. This class gets out at 10:05. Yeah, right? Yes. According to B, just before this, like 595 or so, Pope Gregory the First, called Gregory the Great, the guy after whom Gregorian chant is named, okay? In Rome, he's visiting the slave market. Okay? Ancient Romans, ancient Christians didn't have the mentality we have about slaves, with one exception. If at all possible, slave owners were supposed to treat their slaves well. To read what St. Paul says. You know. And slaves are supposed to obey their slave masters. Leave the rest of that aside. So he's walking in the slave market, and he meets two children. Beautiful children. They're Germanic. So guess what they obviously look like? Blonde hair, blue eyes, fair complexion, you know. And he starts speaking to them, I think through a translator, and he asks them, where are they from? And they say they are Angles. And he said, no, you're not Angles, you're Angelus. They say they're from the land of the Angles. He says they are angels. Angelus means messenger. Okay? But angels are also supposed to be beautiful. Take your breath away. Unless they're fallen angels and putting on a facade, you know. So he says, no, you're beautiful. So he asks where they're from, and they explain they're not from the land of the Angles in Germany. They're from the land of the Angles in what is today England. And he asks them what they believe, and they talk about the German gods. He's like, no, this isn't good. Such beautiful people like this, you know. You got to be saved. So he comes up with the idea, I'm going to send a missionary to the Anglo-land. All right? Okay, this is 597. Has Britain not had Christians? Yes, it has. Britain had Christians probably from the 1st century onward. You can go to the British Museum today in London, and you can see examples of mosaics that have been dated to the mid-2nd century. That's 150. There's one, you go up this flight of stairs, and there's a landing. And there's a mosaic like the size of the floor of this room. You can't step on it, it's roped off, right? And it's the Chi-Rho. It's the initials for Christ on the floor. And there's fishes, you know, fish, etc. Because of the abbreviation, Jesus Christ, Son of God, spells fish when done by its initials, ichthus, right? Christianity had been there a long time. All right? These guys stamped it out, largely. So he thinks, well, I need to send Christianity to them. And so he sends an emissary, a man named Augustine, who later on is canonized by the Catholic Church, or by the Church. Saint Augustine, not the Saint Augustine who was North African. Not the Saint Augustine from Hippo of North Africa who wrote The City of God, who you could read his confessions about his life before he became a Christian and his life after he became a Christian. In his life before he became a Christian, Pornhub has nothing compared to him. I mean,
Isn't he the one who stole pears from a tree?
stole Paris from it.
Someone, I learned about that.
No, not St. Augustine. His mother was a Christian. She prayed for her son all the time. And he finally has this experience, etc. Okay? We're going to talk a little about Augustine more when we get to the Reformation and we talk about the differences between Catholicism and Protestantism. Because a lot of Protestant ideas come straight from Augustine. Okay? And I'm going to take shots at Augustine. So, not this Augustine, the one from North Africa. So this Augustine goes with a group of emissaries. He doesn't want to go. He begs, he tries to get out of it. Why? Because the Germanic people are known as bloodthirsty savages. All right? But he does. He goes. And Bede, this is part of what we'll be talking about. Bede gives us the account of his, being recognized and received and all that kind of stuff. By the time he goes, the English Queen of Kent, I think it is, she's Christian. Because she's actually from Gaul, modern day France, where her family were Christian. But she married a pagan king. That was okay. He kind of appeals to her. She helps butter up her husband, so to speak. Okay? Christianity takes root, and within 100 years, with maybe a few exceptions, pretty much all of the British Isles are Christianized. Ireland has already been Christian. Why? March 17th, St. Patrick and St. Columba. Northern Scotland already has. Okay? So, Christianity returns, Anglo-Saxon becomes Christian. 681, again, from Bede. And we'll spend a lot of time on this on Thursday. I'm just going to mention him now. There's a guy who's illiterate, which means he can't read, and he's serving as a shepherd in a monastery. Has a miracle happen to him. His name is Cadman. And according to Bede, this guy receives the gift of poetry. Nutshell version, which again we'll talk about on Thursday or Tuesday of next week. He's at a party at the monastery. How's that for a paradox, you know? He's in the monastery refectory, that's where they eat. And they're literally having a beershippa, beer ship. I mean, it's a kegger, okay? And the beer is being passed around. It's not passed around in something like this or a little cup. We have surviving buckets that were used to hold ale. And you literally held it like this. And you put your mouth up to the lip and you so it comes out all over you. And that gets passed around, and that is followed, according to Bede, by a harp. That is, you take your drink and then you sing. Okay? So he sees the harp coming around, and he's like, I can't sing. And I don't mean sing, he can't carry a tune. He means sing, compose a poem according to the Germanic methods of poetry. I don't get it. So he excuses himself. He goes out to the barn to sleep it off. And he has a vision. And the vision says, Cadman, sing to me. He says, I can't sing. And the vision says, sing to me. What shall I sing, Lord? And he sings this little poem that we still have today. When Bede writes about that, he puts the poem, because everything Bede writes is in Latin. He puts the poem in Latin. And interestingly, he tells us, but that's not the same as it was in the Old English. Why? Because whenever you translate from one language to another, you lose some of the original, which is why there is value in learning the foreign languages you want to read. Okay? Which we'll talk about later. So Cadman sings this song. The next morning, he tells someone, and the abbess, her name is Hild, okay? We'll talk about that. She says, we need proof. How do you know this was the right kind of spirit? John, in his first or third epistle, says, test the spirits, whether they are from God. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to send you off with a priest, or some priests, and they're going to tell you all kinds of biblical stories. Come back tomorrow, having turned them into poetry. How's that for a final exam, you know? And he does. And we get described a bunch of poems, and we have poems that match those descriptions today. The thing is, no modern scholar, none of us, think those poems had anything to do with Cadman. He wasn't the author of those poems. He might have been the author of others, but not these particular ones. Okay? We're at 958. So, Cadman, this is the beginning of English literature. It's it. Cadman's hymn. Okay? Cadman dies, gets a good burial. Bede writes his ecclesiastical history of the English-speaking people, church history of the English-speaking people, in 731. This period, by the way, from 650 to 800 or so, this is smack dab in the middle of this Dark Ages. You've got a couple pictures in your book of things produced during this period. And I could give you all kinds of pictures from stuff I've taken at the British Museum and other places of other stuff produced during this period. There was nothing dark about it. They just didn't know the great Greek and Latin classics. But for example, some of the material culture they produced cannot be reproduced today. We don't have craftsmen who have the ability. There's a picture of a belt buckle in here. It's called the Sutton Hoo belt buckle. Solid piece of gold. It's about this tall, about this wide, in all this interlaced structure. And it's like, illuminated manuscripts come from this period. Look at one of them. There's one or two in your book. Look at one of them and try to follow one of the lines. You talk about amaze, and you talk about being amazed. That's it, okay? So that's Bede. Very, very quickly. 787. Now, according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, it's a different date. That's because Anglo-Saxon Chronicle is wrong in its date keeping. Okay? 787 is the first indication of the Vikings. And that's because in that year, in the real year, 787, one of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, there are 5 different versions of it. It was kept in 5 different places, so it's slightly different in them. One of them says, in this year, 3 longboats were seen. They didn't arrive, they were just seen in the ocean. This is the beginning of the Viking invasions, okay? Which go on for, well, this is 787. Alfred the Great defeats the great Danish Viking chieftain, Guthrum, in 878. So how do the Viking invasions begin? They initially began kind of like a snatch and grab. They hit coastal cities. So you find a little hamlet on a coastline. What do you go to first to try to find material wealth? Some little hovel where some poor Slav Englishman's living? Nope. Where is there going to be gold, silver?
Castles, fortifications.
Castles don't exist yet. Fortifications do. Castles come from the Middle English period. They're started by William the Conqueror. What else?
Places of worship.
Churches and monasteries. So they start hitting churches and monasteries.
Vikings,
Okay.
right?
Kill the monks and take the material culture. Take the coverings of gospel books. That is, a book that has the 4 gospels. Because that would sit on the altar. And that covering would often be made of gold and encrusted with jewels. Why? It's the Word of God. You treat it with reverence. Okay? The paten and the chalice that are used for the Eucharist, for the communion, gold. You don't use wood for those. All right? Crosses, gold. So churches have a lot of money in things. Okay? So that's where the Vikings start. But they eventually, as the years go by, because that's a 100-year period, they start going more inland. They go up the rivers. And then they start realizing, winter in England, it's a hell of a lot nicer than winter in Denmark and Norway. It doesn't totally ice over. That's why even today, the Brits freak out when they have snowstorms. It's common, but it's not terribly common, okay? So the Vikings, like their, not literal forebears, but kind of, like their Germanic cousins did, 400 years earlier, 300 years earlier? They start staying over, and they start settling down, and they start intermarrying. That is why today, many of our words and even our grammar has been affected by Old Norse, the language of the Vikings. For example, this stuff. What is this? Skin. That's Old Norse. That name is Old Norse. Okay? This thing.
Eyelid or
I. It's Old Norse. Almost every word that begins in modern English with sk is Old Norse. This thing,
Glass? Window?
this thing, if I said what's made out of glass, window, wind, auga, eye.
See
It's the
wind?
eye of the wind. It's where the wind comes through. Eye is where light comes through. Why? Because they didn't have glass. A window was an opening in the wall.
That makes it sound beautiful.
Okay? It is beautiful.
Probably heard it.
Okay? Because it's a metaphor, kind of. Right? What's the number? Something like 7,500, 8,000 words from Old Norse are still used in modern English. Our verb forms changed. The ing ending on present participles, that comes from Old Norse. The Old English either ended in an inde or ende or ande, depending on which part of England you came from. When we say they are, both of those words come from Old Norse. They, them, their, the third person pronouns, plural, those are Old Norse. They're Viking. Just one second. It's the only language that changed the grammar of English when it interacted with English. French didn't, oddly enough. French added a ton of words that we still used. Okay, but not the grammar. Yes?
This is probably a stupid question, but you said like ing comes from them is. I made it think of like the ing and Vikings. What exactly did they call themselves Vikings, or was that like?
Ooh, that's a good, I don't remember if they referred to themselves as Vikings. More than often than not, they would probably refer to themselves by their native tribes. The Danes. Norway's a little bit different because Norway means the way of the north. Because Norway's up north, even from the Danes. Okay? Swedes would have referred to themselves as the Swedes. Icelanders were the Icelanders. The Icelander Vikings probably did call themselves. There's an etymological question as to what the Vich in Viking refers to. Because WIC in Old English just refers to place. So it could be the place of Ing, that Germanic god, for Vikings. Okay? What time is it? 10:06, time to go. Sorry for keeping you over. So for Thursday, if I haven't made it clear, Monday. Read the section on Bede and start The Wanderer. Okay, I'm going to do more Old English background also on Monday, but probably not a lot. I do want to finish this stuff. I'll do this first, and then we'll talk about Bede and Cadman. Maybe get to The Wanderer, but I doubt it.